So it's coming from a French collector. It has a very interesting story because we discovered this for the first time. It's on public view. We discovered this in south of France. We were contacted. And when you have something like this, you show up. You take the next flight and you show up at the home to see the painting. And the collector is a philosopher specializing in Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna. So it took very little to really hit it off. And it was a beautiful story because he bought it from his friend. And he had no idea it was Amrita Sher-Gil or what the value could have been. But he really loved the painting. He's in love with this portrait. And the story goes, the previous owner's father had acquired this in the late 60s. And in the 70s, the son inherited it because the father passes away. And in the 80s or late 80s, this current owner saw this painting at his friend's home, fell in love, it was love at first sight, and said, I would love to own this painting. If you ever want to sell it, please let me know. The friend said, no, I love this painting too. So it stayed. A few years later, he calls the friend and says, you know what? I need to raise some funds. Maybe you still want this painting. Lost no time, bought it in 1992. Since then, he's had it. And so this has been in a home in south of France. And when you speak to this gentleman about this painting, you can see how much he loved the painting. So that's the behind-the-scenes story. And so, of course, we show up and we get the painting to bring it to auction. And for us, to even handle something like this is such an honor. It's a privilege to be in such close proximity to something like this, to have discovered something like this, and unfold a history and a new chapter in the story of portraiture for Amrita. Because there are 19 known portraits, which are all either three-quarter views or frontal, where the artist is directly either confronting or communicating with the viewer. Whereas here, and it's just a portrait with nothing around it. Whereas if you see in this composition, it is like an old master's painting. It's not just a portrait, it's very contemplative. It's not confrontational, because Amrita, as a personality, was quite confrontational and I would say rambunctious and very, very vibrant. And here, you can see she's almost withdrawing herself. And then you start to think, what is a golden bowl doing there? You know, and then you start thinking of old master painting. So I feel it's not just a portraiture, but it's a full painting with her in it. And of course, there's a dialogue, but it's more an internal dialogue. She's going away. And you have to think she's 18. And what is she going through? I mean, she's in Paris. She's enrolled in École des Beaux-Arts, and she's winning first prize for portraits every year. Since, you know, she won it in 31, 32, 33. In 34, she moves back to India. And the same year in Shimla, she gets the award as well, which she, of course, rejects because she was called the woman artist. So, you know, you could see the brilliance, the attitude, she had it all, and the beauty. From the very beginning, when she was very young, if you see her diaries that she kept from the age of 7, you could see that she was brilliant. She wrote the most beautiful poetries. She wrote the most beautiful stories. And her draftsmanship of a 7-year-old is remarkable. And we are very lucky to have these 2-volume books that Vivan Sundaram, her nephew, published, of letters and her drawings and her diaries from that period. And you know right away. And she had this uncle who was visiting her, and he noticed the brilliance and said to her mother that, you know what, she needs training. You need to take her. So her mother was very, very involved in Amrita's upbringing and bringing that artistic side. She was very much into music. So both Amrita and her sister Indira were being groomed for that. And she took them to Europe to learn art, and then finally they decided Paris it's going to be. And the whole family moved to Paris. That's the level of dedication that family had towards her. And so the parents moved to Paris with the girls, and she enrolled in school. She was too young to join the École des Beaux-Arts. They made an exception after they saw her work. So she was one of the youngest artists there. And being one of the youngest artists, she still won all the portrait prizes. So it was, I think, everybody knew from day one that there was brilliance there. It's very interesting because her personality alone was so ahead of the times in India. So she was born in Hungary and comes much later to India with the family as they move in. But she was very young then. And I think her formative life in India was in Shimla with her parents and the Majeethia family, where the girls, that is Amrita and Indira, grew up together as sisters. They were inseparable. They were just a year apart, almost like twins, and both extremely talented. And the mother, as I mentioned earlier, was so devoted and dedicated to bringing these girls' talents out. And it was in music, it was in arts, and Amrita later goes on to say that she couldn't continue with her music because all her energies were being absorbed by the arts. And I think she wanted to just focus. When she was very young, she was completely at home in India. And I think her father, who was also a scholar and a brilliant photographer, documented these girls in different stages of their lives. And that's why we have such vivid photographs of these girls growing up. Absolutely beautifully, I mean, it beautifully paints the picture of these girls and their lives through, 12, 13. Soon after when they moved to Paris, but every summer, every few summers, they would be spending time in Hungary because that's where the mother was from. Once they moved to Paris, and she completely embraces the Parisian life. It was like the bohemian lifestyle, being in these dimly lit cafes, having these friends, and you could see someone like her at home, at ease, and yet at ease enough that she was fluent in French, she was fluent in English, she was fluent in Hungarian. She was straddling so many different nationalities at a very young age. But even though she was doing brilliant work and completely accepted in this Parisian art community, there was something in her that wanted to come back to India. There was something in her that told her she needs to paint in India. And her professor actually said, yes, she needs to go back to India and start painting there. So while she was in Paris, when you see her works, they're very Western in style, in execution. And immediately the last few paintings we see from Paris is when she got the award of the young girls. There's a portrait of Indira and one of her girlfriends. Stunningly beautiful work. But once she moves to India, her style completely changes. When you see these village girls, the woman putting turmeric before, the bridal ceremony, before a bride is given away. All of this she paints are the woman in a bed, which is in India called khatia. These capture the village life of India. And you could see how she transports herself straight from the Parisian life to India seamlessly. It's like she belonged to Paris, and she equally belonged to India, and she equally belonged to Hungary. So it's a beautiful story of cross-fertilization of various nationalities that she stands for. Let's put it this way, she was full of attitude from what I've read in her letters and in all the literature that's available. Like if she won a prize and where she was portrayed as the woman artist, she would reject the prize, and which she did in Shimla. But at the same time, when she wrote about her work, there was conviction. She talked about what she was trying to do. And yes, she did have certain issues about some artists that were very sentimental, and I wouldn't name those artists, but yes, she was very, very open about just saying it, what she thought and what Indian art should be about. So she wrote a lot. And 2 years after she dies, her mother also wrote about her. And that piece that her mother wrote is a short piece. It's almost like a mother mourning the loss of her daughter. And it's a very intimate memoir. And that captures what Amrita was. Seen as a daughter, seen as today's national treasure of India, seen as one of the greatest artists from the world.